On today's episode of Homeworthy, we're in the English countryside visiting an exquisite 18th century home nestled in the charming village of Corsley. This extraordinary home belongs to Keith Johnson, the visionary eye behind Anthropologie's iconic aesthetic, and his husband, Glen Senk, the former CEO of Anthropologie and its parent company, Urban Outfitters. Set against the idyllic backdrop of the English countryside, Corsley House cuts a striking figure with its stately façade and picturesque grounds. Inside, you'll find treasures from Keith's decades-long career, sourcing and collecting antiques and one-of-a-kind objects from around the world. Outside, a romantic walled garden, whimsical topiary, and a graceful fountain emphasizes the home's sense of history and its connection to the land. This is a home that tells a story, not just about design, but about a life rich in adventure, curiosity, and a profound appreciation for beauty in all its forms. You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story.
Hello, Homeworthy. I'm Keith, and welcome to Corsley House. Hi, my name is Keith, and welcome to Corsley House in Corsley, England, in the English countryside. My career has been quite varied and quite a journey, and intersecting with my husband Glen, and we've been together for 60 years. We met when we were 9, and we've been together ever since, and we got a company going called Anthropologie many years ago, and that started an incredible life for me that I had just had a blast running around the world, finding interesting things and trying to tell stories in our retail stores and help tell stories. We did things like we'd invent a character. Maybe it's a girl who's making pottery in the south of France. So I would go out and look for things that she would have in her home. And we would always have these reference points of these fantasy people. And it kept us all very focused. But the upshot of all that is that I have been incredibly varied in my tastes and always looking for new things and crazy different things. So somehow a whole variety of influences have worked their way into our home in England. The stuff that I've just had for a lifetime. Glen and I have been together forever, so I don't actually remember time before him. We were in school, or I was in school, and the teacher brought Glen in. He just moved to our neighborhood. And it was a very liberal, at the time, if you can imagine, 60 years ago, anything being liberal, but it was a liberal school, and the question was, do you believe in God? Which seemed amazing to me that we're asking that question then. And Glen made the point that he only believed what his mother told him to only believe what he'd seen in person. And so he didn't believe in God. He did not believe in God, but he didn't believe in God because he doesn't have proof. So this did not sit well with the rest of the class. Everybody believed in God, and that's what you did. So at recess, he was jumped by most of the kids in the class. I, at 9, was the same size that I am today. Everyone thought I was going to be a football player. Well, that never happened. But I could take care of him at that moment in time. So he looked up and said, my hero. And he will he will say that he knew that was it for him. And then it took me, to be honest, a few years longer. So I think when we were 12, we pretty much made up our minds that was that. And here we are, and in a blink of an eye, here we are. This is our drawing room, living room, drawing room. It's the biggest room in the house. I've had this piece, this sort of Gothic revival bookcase, for something like 20 years, and it's been in multiple homes. It was a gift to me from Glen, and it's one of my favorite pieces, and every time I speak to the antique dealer I bought it from, he reminds me that he wants it back as soon as I decided I don't want it anymore. I just love it because it's one of those things that has had past lives. It was in a big country house that became a boys' school. So on the back of it, it's just filled with all this graffiti from the boys over, the course of 140 years or something. It's just filled with, little sayings and hearts and crazy stuff. And of course, it's just a great repository for all my stuff. This was an antique table from South Africa with some very hard African wood. And there was an artist from South Africa, and he put this iron to lengthen the table. So it's an iron and wood table. And what I remember about this experience was this guy lived in this old factory, and he lived in the guardhouse of the factory, and then was making all his things in the factory buildings. And he was just such a cool guy. And I had taken my nephew, Alex, to South Africa with me. He was so cool that, one of the things, he was silly affectation, but he had his belt and it was buckled on the side. And Alex he has an excuse, he was 9 years old. I had no excuse, I was like 50 or whatever I was. And we both showed up at breakfast the next day with our belts, on the side, because we just thought we'd try to be as cool as this fellow, but we'd never work out that way. So things, just things that the memories of this sort of 50s lamp from a French flea market, the bookcase with the ceramic books on top were from these wonderful girls that I gave a gallery show to many years ago from Sweden. And I'll never forget our time going around Sweden and Stockholm with them. Pottery bought in the English countryside, and these crazy wax figures that I bought in Venice. This Caldermobile that I bought at a flea market here in Frome, a village just outside of our home. So again, it's just that sense of, it's just the travel, all the travel that I've done. And then engaging with artists is the most special thing that I do. So when I used to buy and look for things for our shops, the best thing to do was to find someone who was super creative, and then they can bring something that I couldn't even imagine to bring. So here, like this glass sculpture, I was at a graduation show in Eindhoven, in Holland, and she had just done this program in Venice, in Murano, if I'm getting it right, remembering right, and she just blows the glass into bits of furniture. And I just thought it was just an extraordinary thing to do. What I admire about things like this is that you think, where do things like this come from? Like what is the concept of, like, how do artists think of these things? Be careful if you ask, because sometimes the explanations can go on and on forever. But what you realize is that beautiful things come from a process. Beautiful things don't just appear. I think what I've learned about art and about creativity, I mean, it's not about copying a moment, it's about a spirit. And I just love connecting with these young people all the time they weren't trying to make money, they're just trying to express themselves. And they did it with a deep knowledge very often. And I mean, just connecting with some of these kids sometimes was some of the best moments of my life. You get an idea in your head and things happen. I've always believed that. So I was at the French flea market in Paris, and I saw these benches, and these were from the Pompidou Center, a museum, the wonderfully contemporary museum in Paris. and they were for sale, and they were for sale for a lot of money, and I just didn't know what to do with them at the time, and I thought it was too much to send to shops, so whatever. But it registered in my head, and 10 years later, I'm walking down the street in New York, of all places, and there was a shop that had these benches for their shop, and they were closing the shop, and everything was for sale, and I'm like, oh, we meet again, in the most unlikely place. So that you have to manifest, what you want in life, and it can often happen. Like this sofa, I just didn't know what to do. I'm not a great one for pattern and fabric, but I met this woman, Polly, who dyes her own fabrics. And she just has, she buys antique linens, mostly from France, from Provence, and dyes them in I think, wonderful colors. And then my friend Leslie Ashman, who has this company called Swarm, and she used to work at Anthropologie, and we were very good friends. And she saw the sofa, and then she made these for me, just marbleized fabric, and I just, of course, it means the world to me, because Leslie made them for me, and they're beautiful. I was at a graduation show, and I just happened to be walking by sculpture school, and I walked in, and they were having the graduation show, and one of the objects on display was this dog. And I mean, you could look at it and say he's been burned or something, but I actually looked at it, and it's just the sweetest, most delicate thing, and her expression is absolutely wonderful. And I thought, I have to buy that. And so the graduation ceremony was going on. The woman that was looking after their little gallery space said, well, let me see if I can find him. So she goes upstairs and gets, his name is John O'Reilly. And she got John to come down. He's wearing his cap and gown. And I bought the dog from him. And I think it was meaningful for me. I think it was meaningful for him too. And I went on to commission a horse from him, which I hope to show you later. And a couple of other things as well. So when you find someone that you love, stick with them. Here's the fireplace, made by Jam. It looks 1,000% authentic to me. And you can see carrying on the motifs of the outside of the house. So just making sure that the house there's continuity in the design. In the old days in England, they didn't have French doors per se. Very often they would just have these enormous windows, and you could sort of come in and out through your window. And of course, the amount of glass and light is, a big reason why we bought the house. So this is our dining room. Like most people today, I mean, I know there are people who have formal entertaining quite a bit, but most people, dining room is a very underutilized room. So I just wanted to make this very user-friendly. So I've got sofas and chairs, and Glen has a knitting group, and it's Glen and like a dozen women here every week sitting around knitting. I'm still waiting for my jumper now, which is what they call sweaters in England. I'm waiting for a very long time because I think the knitting group is much more about gossiping than anything else, but because there's no sweater yet. But there's some pretty cool things in here. Some friends make these amazing lights. Draga and Aurel is the name of their company. And I love their lights and so many things that they make. And the arches here, I just suggested a cathedral to me. And the statue was given to Glen by his mom many years ago. These glasses were all made in Murano. And the artist took his books, his favorite books. This is Don Quixote. And he burnt them, of course, which is completely sacrilegious, but he preserved them at the same time. So he took the ashes and put them inside and then blew the glass. This is extraordinary because this looks like it's just an old engraving. It's based on an old engraving, but it's all calligraphy. And it's apparently the government report on the accident of 3 Mile Island, which was an atomic accident many years ago. And so he drew all that out. Incredibly time-consuming, but I think, incredibly beautiful. Another wonderful sculpture from John O'Reilly. Again, he just captures almost the moment of birth in a way that I don't know anyone else that can quite do that. This is a portrait of the Queen. The photographer's name is Levine, and it's the only official portrait of the Queen where her eyes are closed. It's a lenticular print, so it's these tiny little ridges, so it kind of moves a bit. And it's taken with, I think, like dozens of cameras, and to create this very interesting feeling. I quite love them. Some more of my doodles. And these dog sculptures, which I adore, are from a Welsh sculptor named Sally Matthews. And anything to do with dogs I love, and these I just think she makes them out of hay and cow muck and just worthless stuff, but she just, I don't know, I think she's able to get something about the way dogs express themselves, or I don't know, they come alive for me. Decrepit leather benches we've had for donkey years, and I love things when they're very beaten up. It's just, it's who I am. It's who what our company was about in a way. That very, patina. Although it's definitely on the wrong side of patina, But these originally were billiard benches. So they were on tall legs, and you'd step up to them, and you'd look down at the billiard table. So they were for viewing, billiards. One of my favorite things in the house has to be, well, here's Thatch, one of my real favorite things in the house. And then, of course, Thatch's portrait. So I noticed on Instagram that there was a local stylist named Liddy Holt who was looking for a Welsh Corgi. And strangely, Welsh Corgis are actually quite rare in England. And we've had them for 45 years. So I called her and I said, well, I've got a Welsh Corgi. So she rushed over, she took one look at Thatch and knew that he was a star, which he is, of course. And the next thing you know, he was in an ad campaign for Butler & Wilson, which is a great jewelry company in England. And so Thatch's portrait was, everywhere for a while. My little star. The house was, it was cared for, but in no way was it what we wanted it to be. Exactly. I mean, we didn't, thankfully, and there are very strict rules about historic houses in England. Fortunately, we didn't want to bend any of the rules because we love old houses and all the quirks and things about them are what works for us. It was tired, it needed new bathrooms, it needed a new kitchen. Glen is obsessed with cooking, loves cooking. Kitchen's always a major part of the home, of course, for everybody, really. I wanted to make that just as great a space as I could, and for him, it needed more light, so we were able to put in a huge skylight. There's a reclamation place very nearby us, and which I haunted to find some authentic materials, mostly for the garden, for old stone paths and brick paths. And my philosophy has always been to work with what's there, work with the history of the house, and honor it as best as you can. It wasn't really a renovation or even technically a restoration, but it was just sort of like just really celebrating what was there and then having some fun with it. So I'm going to take you through into the kitchen. Part of the kitchen, is the scullery, and this is where back of house doing the dishes and storing all your better china. And details that I love are just like these sinks are, they're all made of wood. So if you drop something, a dish, it's much less likely to break than if you dropped it on a ceramic sink or a metal sink. This is a potter from South Africa. I see this saying, and there's almost never a day in the world that we live in where I can't look at that and think, yeah, that's true. And then just funny things. Like I have this crazy collection of, yes, they look like eggs, but actually they're pottery, and the idea is you put these under your chickens who aren't laying, and it gets them to start laying eggs, or so the theory goes. But they're everywhere in France at antique shops quite a bit, so there must be something to it. Very English thing. You do the dishes, and then you just put them here, and they drip down and dry. And honestly, it's easier than a dishwasher, I think, sometimes. By the time you find a place to put the dishes in, take them, half wash them anyway. It's the easiest thing in the world. I think it's a brilliant system. I'm a New Yorker in my soul. I love New York. 21 Club, a big part of the history of New York. And every year, for I don't know how many years, but quite a few years, they would give their best customers a silk scarf. And it was a new design all the time, every year. Of course, having a collector's mentality, I got one. Next thing you know, I had 10. It's an illness for people who collect things. Other crazy things. These Murano liqueur, and the liqueur company back in the day would have Murano sculptures as the corks. So how crazy is that? And they become quite collectible, but it wasn't so unusual. But there you go. This is where I spend a great deal of my time, making espressos. And I collected espresso machines. So this is like one of the great collectible espresso machines. It's called the Atomic, and it's a 50s icon. People who, it's just a period piece that it just says it all about mid-century and the atom, and it's got a lot in this little thing. It packs a lot of style and information. So back as my collector, and what I would say about manifesting. So I couldn't find one, and they're collectible and expensive. They become relatively hard to find, and of course the prices went up. And I was in Australia on a buying trip, and they briefly made them in Australia. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll find one, because half the fun of buying something is not that you go out and you just spend the money. It's the hunt, and you can find it for less. It's just more fun. Human nature. I don't know why. And I couldn't find one in Australia, but the place that originally made them was selling T-shirts. So I bought one that said Atomic Espresso Machines on the T-shirt. This is a joke. I came home from Australia, got an Atomic Espresso T-shirt. I was going down to the flea market in New York City on 25th Street. It was quite a great one for the longest time. Now it's quite reduced in size. There's a big table set out, and there's a sign that says, everything on the table, $10. So I'm looking at it, and what do I see? And I've looked for a long time. That machine sitting on the table for $10. And I'm wearing the T-shirt that says Atomic Espresso Machine. So I quickly took the T-shirt off and turned it upside down and put it back on. I certainly didn't want to go to the guy with that T-shirt on. And so I got it for $10. After all, after looking all over Australia, so there it was on 26th Street in New York City. I needed a gate to keep my dogs from, getting everywhere, and so I had this lovely guy named Colin who made this gate for me. And then I had to fix my lead roof. One of the joys of owning a country house in England is that you have to very expensively repair the roof all the time. Anyway, so the fellow who made it, who repaired the roof, gave me this little lead mouse at the end of the day. It was just awfully sweet. So rather than have it just a lost object somewhere, I made him part of the gate. So now he's just, he's a reminder of this lovely guy who charged me a fortune for my roof. So, and then here's the kitchen. So this is where, Glen is a passionate cook, so it was important for this space to be just really light and airy. So created this big skylight. We were able to put in another window, which we did, and made a big light and airy space. When we bought the house, the aga, which is what every British country person likes to have, is an aga stove, was sitting right here awkwardly in the middle of the space. I don't know why, or the history of all that. So there was a huge amount of reorganization in here. But thankfully, you have these incredible floors, these wonderful floors. And as every good decorator will say, you can often start with a wonderful floor and some good architecture, and away you go. You don't need much more. I've always made big islands for Glen. They wind up really being big islands for me because I just fill them up with stuff like everything else. I just fill, These are French bottle racks, and which I bought hundreds of over the years because in the stores we just would always put mugs and objects on them. It was just the most great place to, for selling, but incredibly practical in the kitchen too. Just love having that. Keeping with my theme of coffee and espresso, this is one of my favorite objects. Because when we grew up, there was a place, and it's still there in New York City, it's the oldest coffee shop, I believe, in America, called Cafe Reggio. And they had an even larger version of this. But my fantasy for years was to find one of these machines. It's from about 1910. And I finally found one by weird chance on eBay, but it was in Colombia. If you look at this chair, it just looks like an ordinary sort of French, wicker chair. But in fact, it's solid bronze. And it weighs something like 150 pounds. And it's a reproduction of Van Gogh's chair that he used in Saint Remy in a sanatorium in Saint Remy before his death. So it's actually lifted up and tied together, and it's quite a tribute to him. But if you don't know that it's bronze and you think you're just going to quickly move it, you're in for a surprise. It's funny because this side of this room is the oldest part of the oldest part of the house, and where the ceilings become much lower, and the room's a bit more intimate. And then we have these amazing stone and lead windows, and this leads out into what I think is one of the prettiest parts of the outside of the house. It's one of the things that I love because there's it has like a castle turret, and it has a fairy tale quality to this entrance to the house. These sofas are Dutch 18th century sofas. The table is just sort of a Gothic revival oak table that, again, from my friend David Grocott, who has given me everything that I half the things that I love from David. I just collected everything white. I tried to stay a bit neutral, and I just love these old French tureens. I got started because I wanted to make tureens for our shops, and I started collecting different ones because I wanted a handle from this one, and top from this one, this and that. So I started collecting a bunch of them, And the next thing I know, I have like 20 of them. I think about decorating in a bit of perhaps an offbeat way, because I am just a very passionate shopper, and I love objects, I love things, I love stories, I love people who make things, and I'm just, for me, the most exciting thing in the world is to find somebody who either collects things, or old things, in a very particular way, or recognizes the value of old things and brings value to it through their collection that I didn't notice before, or someone who can, just invent something whole cloth. And so I've been collecting forever, and that drives my interior design, if you want to call it interior design. And then I just love, less so now that I'm getting old, but I used to love just moving things around all the time, because you saw things anew. I'm someone that believes that there's like a spirited element to things, that things that have a certain life, and if you move them and change them, you see them in a whole new way. I like to just see my own past, our past, and celebrate the times and the places that I've been. So I just want to see the things that I love in front of me all the time, and I want to rediscover them anew. I guess the lucky thing is that there's a consistency to my eye. So I'm not going off in completely crazy different directions, even though there might be very different periods. There is a certain sense of order to what I'm buying. One of the things that I love about country houses, old houses, and having lived in New York most of my life, New York City, every square inch is accounted for. And it's wonderful how in the countryside there are these sort of spaces that you're not quite sure what they were about or why they needed all this space and devoted to things that are no longer relevant. But they have this wonderful hallway, very into recycling everything. All these slates, the brackets, many things around the house, anything structural was found on the property. There's a lot of sort of little outbuildings and rooms that are filled with old stuff. So of course I love all that. So this was just a great place to put excess cooking things. What I was saying, how I love architectural things. Years ago I bought lots of these old radiators. I just think it's just an extraordinary bit of architecture or design, not architecture. It's very sort of machine age thing, and I never thought that I'd actually have it working, but I had this brilliant plumber here. He goes, "Oh, Keith, I'll get that working, no problem." And so the issue is that it is very hot. It should be in an enormous room and not a hallway. And then I'm totally into gardening, and I love flowers. So this was 100 years ago or 200. This was a flower room, but then it just became something else entirely. But I found in the old plans that it was actually a flower room. So I returned it back to being a flower room, and it's just incredibly functional. So just found wonderful old sink and these wonderful old taps, and it's just it's an inspired place to do flowers. And then my friend Leslie Ashman, who I mentioned earlier, made my pillows, also does these extraordinary paintings. She buys antique paintings in the market, and then she goes home and weaves in fabrics into and creates these I think quite extraordinary paintings. This is just this wonderful chair, bought years ago from my friend David, and it's an old tractor seat that's been made into a Windsor chair. So it's a bit of, I guess, folk art, really, but I think just incredibly elegant. This is Baba, and Baba is a dream, a total dream. And she loves to lean on me all the time. She leans on me all the time, which I love. So this is a funny room that we're going to go into, because this next room, because we use it as our day-to-day entrance, but I didn't know this room existed. Because when we saw the house, it was actually sealed off. This was sealed off. And I know it seems very strange that I didn't know this room, but I didn't know it did. And I was finally got all the old plans, and I said, wait a minute. So now we use this as our entrance, but it's a boot room, which is like when you live in the countryside, you're always coming in with muddy boots and muddy dogs, and so you have a boot room. If fortunate enough to have a boot room, and you can get all the mud off you. And again, with finding something, if you really, as I keep saying, manifest it, or whatever the word. So there was in this fireplace, there was back in the day an old stove, and I had a drawing of what this room was, but I thought, what are the chances of finding a stove that would fit? And sure enough, I found one, and it's a completely wood-fired stove. And I use it as a fireplace on occasion, just because it's very nice to come in to the fire. But it does actually function as an oven. So, and this was a birthday present that I gave to Glen. It's another John O'Reilly sculpture of a horse basically just being born, which we've had many now. I've seen several being born right here now on our property, because we're breeding horses. Incredibly kind people that live here. There's a man he's 92 years old, and he asked me if I wanted a model of our house. And I said absolutely yes, because I know he's brilliant at it. And it took him, I don't know, months and months, because he measured every window, every tiny detail, and it's 100% accurate. And when I asked him what I owed him, he absolutely refused to be paid. He said, I'm 92 years old, I don't need the money. I said, what charity do you love? What can I do for you? That's ridiculous. But he just loves making things at 92. I mean, what an unbelievable blessing. And then, unlike my unlikely passions, this is another radiator, but this one is known as a horse jump radiator, because it looks like out in the field, what you jump your horses over. What really surprised me about our move, and I've always loved England. I've always loved English humor, but I thought, okay, we're moving to really the countryside, and it's not the countryside that I knew, or where people from London were weekending. Well, I quickly learned, and the best part about the house is our friends here. The day that we moved in, people were coming over with jam that they made. I mean, this local fellow who makes his own honey came over with honey. Somebody else brought a pie. I mean, it was incredible. I've lived in lots and lots of places. We've never been so well received. I was worried, we're a gay couple, we're moving to deep countryside. Could not have been less of an issue. We've been so welcome to the community here, and we're so grateful. And we love to do charity events at the house, and we love to have big garden parties in support of the community. We have the garden open for the National Garden Scheme. So we're very involved in the community, and that's a big part of our enjoyment of the house. So as I said, one of the reasons why we wanted the house was for the garden. This was just a lawn before, and so we created a fountain. It's just always nice to have wonderful running water. I took a cue from other parts of the surrounding of the house with the stones, and I went on the hunt for old stones and put in detailing and circles and just all sorts of small details that were in the house in other parts of the garden, just to maintain the integrity of that. It's kind of it's actually it's a later sort of thing. Morris, there's a designer named Lutyens, and that was sort of a very kind of Lutyens-inspired thing that was done to the house. I'm not sure exactly when, but I went with that theme because I love that work. I'll tell you, when we first came to the house, it certainly looked like it ticked the boxes, just from the outside, but looks can be deceiving. And then we walked into the front entrance hall, and there's a cantilevered staircase, stone staircase, that seems to defy gravity. And I can't really describe what makes it stand up, because it's only into the wall about this much. And it basically is hanging there in this crazy geometry of one on top of the other, everything supporting the whole. And I often think when I'm walking down, is this the last time anyone's going to walk on this staircase? It just seems impossible, but it is a beautiful thing to behold, and the ironwork and the strap work, and I just thought the quality just jumped out at me. And so that was my first feeling of falling in love. And then I walked into the library, and the round room with the rounded windows and the scale of the ceilings, and it just really worked for me. There was no question in my mind that this was going to be our house. Okay, so this is our library. There are some kind of interesting objects here. This chair I bought many, many years ago from a young guy at the time. We were both younger, Julian Mayer. And what's incredible about it is he designed it on computer, and it's a Queen Anne chair, but it's all just slices of plywood, and then just all sort of glued up to become what I think is quite a beautiful interpretation of a Queen Anne chair. These are crazy. I mean, this is a love-hate thing for some, but they're actually, I was walking down the street with one of my oldest friends, Patty, and they were tearing up the street in New York City, and these were subway grates. So basically, they're in the sidewalk and letting light down into the subway. So they're, I don't know when they were from. They're probably from the turn of the last century. So I hailed down a guy who had a flatbed truck just driving by, and I said, I bribed him into dropping them down at my house, and which wasn't too far away, but they were impossible to carry them, absolutely impossible. They weigh a ton. Then I have some of my favorite things are one of my dearest friends, his name is David Grocott, and David can reinvent something that's very familiar and old and make it seem entirely new and special and interesting. And it's a quality that I have tremendous admiration for, and David is just awesome. So he took this old Chesterfield sofa and he recovered it in Merry-Macao. And I just think, it could be something very humdrum, but here it is, and I think it looks wonderful. And then I have these terracotta, one's a dog and one is sort of a fox. And these were finials on top of a big old Irish house. And they found their way, thankfully, I guess the house was taken down, and these are some of the artifacts that were saved. And I just adore them. Like this one is so sweet. You just look at her, and she reminds me of a dog that I used to have named Orbit, who was just like an angel. And then this fellow is definitely a bit devilish. Fortunately, I didn't have a dog like him. All my dogs have been sweet. But I do have a certain admiration for his, devil may care attitude. And then I have this wonderful goat. I've spent a good part of my life in India. And there are certain holidays that the villagers will go out and paint all their goats. And just paint the animals, the elephants, the goats, and in these incredible patterns. He was a wonderful artist, and he recreated them in plaster. And so I bought some. I couldn't resist them. I just thought they were wonderful. This is a maquette for tapestry. I was at a really basic flea market, like more of just a junk garage, more of a garage sale than full-on market. But somebody pulled up with a truck, and this was in a roll, and he rolled it out onto the ground, and I saw it, and like, antique dealers, those bastards, they all have eyes behind their head, as I do, and we all spotted it at the same moment. And there's a rule that if you have your finger on it first, then you get to try and buy it first. And until you take your hand off of it, everybody stays away. So I don't know how I did it, fitter days. I got to it first and bought it, and I don't know. It's just, of course, it's dogs. It's old, it's beautiful. So I've just prized it forever. Loved it forever. And then a lot of my life was looking to make things for the stores. So I bought this old sofa at a fair called the Battersea Fair in London. As a decorative fair, it's quite, it's a great one to visit because it's an incredible designer resource, and you'll find objects, absolutely beautiful objects. And I went there and I found this sofa. So I sent it to North Carolina, and basically we tried to do as faithful a reproduction of it as we could. And this became our best-selling sofa for many, many years. It was called the Cotswold sofa. And I would never buy something that I wouldn't have in my own home. And so that's how I always set about. I would think, okay, where am I going to put that? Where am I going to put that in my own home? It has to ring true to me, also, or it's going to feel false. So that was my drive. That was always in my head. And when I saw this sofa, well, obviously it is me because here it is. Many, many years later, I still have it. The wall color is a Farrow and Ball paint. I stayed in the fellow's name is Tom, who basically founded Farrow and Ball, and I stayed at his house in Scotland. And one of the rooms was this color, and I thought, well, it's going to work for me. But I don't know. Lately, I'm thinking about stronger colors. I'm just feeling like I want to be really like I'm going to repaint. We've been here for 8 years, so I'm like, no, next paint job is going to be I'm going to ramp it up. This lamp is sort of a cool object. It's rock crystals, and there was a famous place in New York. I don't think it's existed for a long time. If they still exist, I'm sorry, but it's called Carol Stupel. And they made these lights in the 50s. Again, it was one of those things that I remembered when I was a kid, that I wanted one. I loved that. I wanted that. And what I said about something else, just manifest it, just think it. And I found one. Just a lucky find, and a cool object. This is an overhead light, and it's this fellow named Mark Antonio, who is one of the most endlessly creative people I've ever met in my life. He's just extraordinary. He's come up with ideas. You would have, I'll bet a lot of people watching Homeworthy would recognize some of Mark Antonio's products because he's so original, and he's gotten into shops across the world. But I met him when he was a kid. I gave him a show in our Rockefeller Center store, a big exhibition of his work, and we remained friends. The one thing I don't like is when people entirely give their home over to an interior designer or a retail concept or a new fad. I want to see the person. I always want to feel the person when I go into a home. I mean, there are a lot of people who just don't really even care, which I find utterly indecipherable. I can't quite imagine that people just don't care. But then I'm like, there's different strokes for different folks, but I relate to people who are passionate about their homes. I'm going to take you into the entrance hall, which is the place that really got us to love the house right away. This is pretty special. So when we came into the house the first time, this is what we walked into, this extraordinary staircase. And it's stone, and it only goes into the wall about that deep. And yet somehow, this thing has been standing here for a couple hundred years. I really don't understand the science behind it, but I've been up and down enough times to realize it's going to stay, but it's all just leaning on each other and creating this enormous strength and beauty. So I just looked at the detailing, the ebony ribbing into the baluster, and it just spoke quality. And then I have this chair that I'm kind of obsessed with. I got this at Rosanna Orlandi, who is an incredible resource in Milan. Rosanna recognizes talent faster, earlier than anybody does. She is a force in the creative world and people who make objects. There's nobody higher than Rosanna. She's amazing. And she introduced me to Nacho. And what's fun about this chair, it's a lover's chair, which of course isn't that obvious. Well, no, it's not obvious, but the idea is that you can sit here and the person that you're having a relationship with can be in the other side, and you can be holding hands inside, and no one would be the wiser that you got something going on. So, and then in the idea that you stay true to certain artists, I always would check back, what's Julian, who made that sliced wood chair in my library, what's he up to? And he's making these chairs. It's good in the hallway because you're not going to linger, you're not going to spend all day there, but actually, it's not bad. But I wouldn't watch television on it, Actually, not a long show anyway, but I just think I absolutely love looking at it. And then this speaker is actually made of pottery, and it's made by the two Swedish ladies that made the books inside. And then up above us, these photographs are all of our horses, or Glen's favorite horses. Glen was a hunter jumper, a horseback rider, and he was really, really very, very good at the sport. I think he was the #1 in the sport, amateur owner for years. And we actually brought all these guys with us. They're all retired, but we brought them with us from the States, and they're living in our garden right now. So they're retired, so they're just munching on grass and leading their best life. But Glen loves them to pieces, and I love just having them out there. Interesting thing about the door is, it echoes some of the detailing on the outside of the house. This Greek motif, and in fact, what I used some of that when I redid the fireplace in the drawing room. You can see that this motif is repeated in the fireplace. So this is our bedroom. It's got a few things in it that I really do love. This cupboard, or if you can call it a cabinet, it doesn't hold very much. It's something that I bought at a student fair. The bed is a bed from India. When I bought it, it was described as a Maharaja's bed, but I've seen a lot of these beds, and there are way more of these beds than there are Maharajas. But still, it's a great size, and it often winds up with 3 dogs and Glen and I, so we need a Maharaja-sized bed. I had this wonderful guy who's since passed away so sadly because he's so creative. When we got married, I wanted to make tablecloths for this boat that we got married on. And we were experimenting with different things, and he knew how much Glen loved horses. And there's this photographer from early days, a photographer who studied, who discovered that how horses actually ran, because before photography, when they galloped, it was so fast that people didn't really understand how horses ran. And so he took, his name was Edward Muybridge, and he took a book of old Edward Muybridge photos and then created them exactly his process, I can't tell you. But I just was enchanted by what he could do, and he made a whole bunch of things for me. So this is our bathroom, no surprise. And basically I wanted to center it on the view. It's quite a luxury being retired and being able to take a long bath is quite a luxury. And then looking out and seeing the view, it's quite a nice thing. And reflecting the view this way is another view this way, photographed by a young photographer that we just got. His name is Finn Gibson, and that's in Scotland. I had the sink made, a bit reflecting the cabinet downstairs, a bit Gothic revival. And the wallpaper is actually marbleized paper. So it's a couple hundred of individual sheets of paper that have been just all put together. So it's quite a unique thing. The horses it's just an old etching plate. This is a towel warmer. Again, with the horse theme, it just reminded me of a saddle rack. And I just love the scale of it. It's just so chunky, and so I found it irresistible. So, the word home, it's really mostly about people. Just wanting to create an environment that people will come over and be happy in, and feel comfortable in. It's not about it's hopefully not about showing off, although, this is a big house and I could be that, and I don't want that. It should be just a place where people are always happy to come back to, because they know that it's just a welcoming environment, And that's where I always want to come back to. I mean, I traveled so much for so long. I traveled 6 months a year for 25 years for my job. And I loved every moment of it. But now, I mean, home has another special resonance because I don't want to leave. You know, I've discovered gardening. I guess it shows that I'm getting old. And of course, mostly home is where my dogs are, so that is tremendously important to me. Thank you guys so much for coming and watching. And I do love sharing all of the memories that I have of the things in the house and how the place has evolved. So again, thank you so much, and gotta run. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to go to homeworthy.com for exclusive content, shopping guides, and so much more.